Hello, everyone. We start today our last lecture from our project concerning Kharkiv region in wartime. Today, we are speaking about the war as a test of the capacity of Ukrainian society. Our speaker today, Julia Sєдої, Deputy Director of the Northern Trans-Regional Department of Medical Service of Kharkiv, Sumy and Poltava region. Julia is an expert on gender and political issues, and now she is a research fellow of Konrada Adenauera Foundation. Also, Julia is consultant of NDI for international affairs in Ukraine in the area of gender policy and non-discrimination, and also advisor of the governor of Kharkiv Regional State Administration. Also, Julia, human rights local expert at the area concerning Council of Europe. And now we are speaking about the war in Ukraine. To my mind, not only to my mind, but for many now substantial research done for this 9 months, war radically influences a society, transforming the workings of social institutions and changing social relationships. Under military conditions, each sphere of life becomes reoriented to meet the survival needs. And this priority focus influences adherence to values and previously established patterns of behavior, enhancing some social bonds and making others less sustainable. What dramatic changes did Ukrainian society undergo during the first 9 months of the war? And of course, social mobilization in Ukraine in the face of the Russian aggression remains high. The majority of the population actively supports the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces and the authorities, and there are relatively few cases of collaboration with enemy forces in the occupied territories. However, the lack of prospects for a quick end to the war may weaken the determination to resist. That's why it's important to provide support directly to Ukrainian society, including military and humanitarian aid. And also, I would like to mention that this project becomes possible due to the support of the Konrada Adenauera Foundation, Science at Risk Program, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. And now, Julia, please, you are welcome to please get the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elena. And I would like to tell you that today it is the last lecture of this project, Scientists at Risk, and it's a big honor for me to be the last lecture of these cycles of lecture, what is supported by Konrada Adenauera Foundations. So my topic is rather interesting for all scientists, but mostly for sociologists and for whole social scientists in the whole world. We are living in a rather difficult time, and the challenges that society faced over a time, many of our perception give rise to many new practices that we use to adapt and overcome these situations. The very famous scientist Robert McKay wrote the book, The Test of War, and it is a book about the events of 1939 and 1945. This is a serious analytical work, data analysis of evidence of how the British society experiences the Second World War. War becomes a test for the capacity of social institutions, economical institutions, political institutions, provisions of resources, cohesion of nations. However, events and processes during the war are manifested not only of the positive test, but war also becomes a litmus test that reveals negative process. There are manifestations of constitutional disorder, decline in production, black market, looting, manifestations of hostility to Russian culture in our case. And this process also requires our careful attention because they affect social relations, network of interactions, social practice, perceptions of self and society are changing. How did the society end with the state of this war, and what structural features were able to ensure the movement to victory, support public dignity and other things? What our society was like and why we can over such dynamics in confronting aggression to it. On the eve of the war, sociological researches significant changes in the social structure of society, and they were due to the fact that during the previous 10 years, the real distributions of people opportunities has changed. People significantly increased their identification with the middle class. Many effective strategies of adaptations to social instability and responses to social injustice were born and spread. And these strategies and practices continue to play a fundamental role in our movement to victory and in the constructions of a new social order after the war. So let us talk about these changes and about the risk. And the first one is the demographic context I would like to share with you. Why we are talking about the demographic context is, first of all, because it is very important nowadays. Demographic context will just not give ambitious estimates of what we will have to deal with. Will demographic changes lead to a demographic catastrophe with the corresponding institution, humanitarian, economical consequences, or maybe they will become the new demographical opportunities? We entered the state of war being a protected demographic crisis. More preciously, the trends had stopped just because of the war. And what will we have after the war? And today we can talk about the first crisis about that. You know that almost 70% of women who went abroad, they have high education. What does it mean? According to the very famous scientist, Ukrainian scientist Ella Libanova, she's director of Institute of Demography and Social Studies of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. These women who having this high education, they are socialized in other society much better, and they have high chances to get another educations and work, and they will not return to Ukraine. In the worst scenario, the country may lose up 5 million people who will not return home from abroad. The mortality rate in the country has increased. The birth rate has fallen. Migration has increased. What can I say here? We will talk about the fall in the birth rate in 2024 on average. One Ukrainian woman gave birth to 1.1 children in her life. To ensure at least simple reproductions of the generation, we need 2.15 children per woman. This year, we will see, of course, a decline in the birth rate, but not yet catastrophic. But the next year, the birth rate will be catastrophic. And I think, and according to demographic scientists, the rate per one woman will be 0.7. If the war doesn't end in 2023, probably 2024 will not be better. The mortality situation is not very positive either. Firstly, we don't really know how many people have been killed during the military battles, and not only killed, but how many people died. We have always had a not very big numerical advantage of women compared to the number of men. And now, because of the war, the gender imbalance will be greater, and there will be simply not enough men to rebuild the country or to start the new family. And the war in Ukraine has harmed all children, both those who suffered physically and those who suffered psychological trauma, and we were forced to leave their homes or take other children into their homes. According to official data, the following children have died in Ukraine so far. And here and right now we have almost 7 million children. All of them have suffered. Some suffered in the literal sense, catastrophically and irreversibly, because they lost their parents, they lost their homes, lost their usual rhythm of life, and others. Some may live on the safe territory of Ukraine, but there are children who came from the territories where it is impossible to adapt now. And they see this grief, this misfortune of children and parents who are unable to fully give their children a happy childhood. I don't think it is the final figures, definitely no, and we don't know the situation in the temporarily occupied territories. And I'm sure that as soon as we go there, the numbers of affected children, killed people will increase significantly. And you know, today's almost 2,000 children have been orphaned. According to the National Service, Social Service of Ukraine, 1,735 children are left without parental care today. According to various sources, from 2,000 children to 500,000 have been deported or forcibly removed from Ukraine by Russians. Thus, today it is listed 2,044 people, children, now not on their own motherland. They had to be in another territory. It is important to say that many children remain in family ties home. Do you know that in Kharkiv, for example, we have a lot of people, not only in Kharkiv, in other city too, but we have in Kharkiv a resident, home resident, what was organized by Maria Chupinina, and she took 3 orphan girls in her family, whom she now takes care of. Будь ласка, покажіть слайд з фотографією Марії Чупініної. And now you can see, if you can see on the presentations, the Maria Chupinina, who adopted these wonderful children for her own. The next one, please. Будь ласка, покажіть фотографію там, де написано Марія Чупініна. Okay, so just would like to explain you that there are a lot of families who are really ready to adopt people, and instead of situation what is going now in country where a lot of people and a lot of children are staying without parents' care, a lot of other Ukrainians are ready to adopt these children and to give them another opportunity for their happy childhood. The next one, institutional context. Institutional context. Будь ласка, покажіть наступний слайд. Institutional context, it is very, very important for discussions, for understanding, because it is quite ambitious. What awaits us? Economic disaster or economic renovations? Authoritarian populism or deliberative democracy? You know that during the war it is almost impossible without military hierarchy, centralizations, authoritarianism. However, society demonstrates high civic activity, closing gaps, so perhaps the future will be the same, deliberative democracy. What else is happening before our eyes? Depopulations of some territories and excessive of others. Changes in the settlement structure will change the labor market, change the demands for professional skills, employment structure, production structure, and of course, we expect increased economic differentiations and stratification. This will be influenced by factors of housing preservation, displacement, and the ability to adapt professionally. There is an assumption that the war will result in the emergence of new middle class, of the informational and digital age, which was formed under the influence of the expansion of higher education, globalizations, and technological skills aided. Its representatives have an average level of social, economic, and cultural well-being. They manifest themselves in various forms of public activism during the war with Russia. They have high educations, modern digital skills, ability to social networking, postmodern values, or self-expressions. Actually, they will be principal promoters of the new democracy, and Ukrainian society is waiting for this change so much. And probably due to the fact that the actions of the authority during the aggressions are supported by the citizens of the country. Thus, if in Ukraine anti-coronavirus measures, counteractions of the crisis, support of the populations and business were severely criticized for disorganization and destructiveness, then, to contrast the aggressions and save people's lives, the Ukrainian government organized both financial assistance and evacuation of the population from the most affected areas in timely manner. Thus, in order to counter the aggressor, there was a conscious and voluntary unity of citizens, a balanced centralization of governance, subordinations of all political and economic interests to a single goal, the most effective fight against the aggressor, which at the same time contributed to the strengthening of welfare. So this level of welfare for sure depends on purchasing power. The reduction in inflation will certainly give households confidence in the improvement of the situations. And unfortunately, since the consumer price index is significantly depends on the food price index, there is a reason to believe that the inflationary component will be significant, at least until spring 2023, due to the high dependence of processing industries on the cost of imported energy. Also, the main price shocks have already occurred in the spring of 2022, and there were reasons to hope for a reduction in inflationary pressure in 2023. A new wave of destructions of critical infrastructure by the Russian aggressor, as indicated, may resume inflationary threats. Also, we can talk about the Ukrainian business. Could you show the next slide, please? Будь ласка, покажіть наступний слайд. Ukrainian business demonstrates resilience and adaptability during the war. This is evidenced by the result of business survey conducted by Gradis research company, and to them, 45% of companies continuing to work as before, even during the war, and 35% they're working partially. At the same time, we can also talk about the 12% of the survived business. They suspended their operation during the war. Of course, it would be much harder for Ukrainians to cope with aggression on its own. The international community has made and is making significant economic, military humanitarian effort and resources to support Ukraine. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale war, the volume of financial assistance, including grants from international partners, it's amounted to $23 billion, and from USA, and almost 5 billion euro from European Union. And it's only data I could find from the moment of 2 months ago. I think that now we got much more. And that in addition to financial, the budget deficit and debt repayment allowed it to keep gross international reserves at the level for more than $25 billion. So another one aspect I would like to share with you, it is a medical aspect. Could you show please the next slide? So medical aspect. Again, I would like to use the result of Gradus company, where they talk that the 71% of respondents have recently experienced stress or severe nervousness. And the main cause of stress and nervousness, it is full-scale war. And you know, according to their data, 51% of military with combat experience and people who lost their loved ones in the war, 53% are currently in the greatest needs of psychological assistance. And for sure, the aspect of war that cause stress of severe nervousness, insecurity, and loss of income. And you know that we started the medical reforms more than 3 years ago. And this is organizations what is support the medical reform and serve it. It is National Health Service of Ukraine. This organization has simplified access to medical care according to the new challenges we got during this Russian aggression against the Ukrainians. Because of the war, many Ukrainians have left their homes and become internally displaced. To preserve access to medical care, National Health Service of Ukraine made declaration optional. And now internally displaced persons can visit any family doctor anywhere, therapist or pediatrics, and get consultations, treatment, and other medical service. For 2023, in the package of medical service related to primary health care, the reduction coefficient for excesses declaration has been cancelled, and taken into account the growing number of wounded and injured as a result of military aggressions of Russia Federation against Ukraine, new packages of medical service have been developed aimed at comprehensive rehabilitations of the injured of the acute and subacute period, rehabilitation care for adults and children in inpatient setting, rehabilitation care for adults and children for in outpatient settings too. These packages of medical service are aimed at comprehensive rehabilitation care, both psychologically and restoration of functions of various body systems with the use of active technologies. And the list of the service provided to the patients has been significantly increased. And in addition, I would like to tell you that a package of medical service has been developed to increase the availability of psychological and psychiatrist care, support and treatment of adults and children with mental disorders, and the primary level of medical care. And all these are talking that state still in process of understanding the risk and understanding what is going and a lot of aspects in the social life, and appearing of new medical service packages, appearing of the new system of children care, appearing of the new understanding how we could support financially people during the war. All this is a good test for our society. In the end, I just would like to tell you that National Health Service of Ukraine is expanding the reimbursement program too. And starting from October 2022, drugs for the treatment of Parkinsonism can be obtained by electronic prescriptions. And in 2023, it is planned to reimburse immunosuppressive drugs from January, and from the second part of the next year, test strip for patients with diabetes, for and painkillers for palliative patients will be accepted. It is a big step for that, because right now, being in Berlin now, I'm personally involved in process when I'm asking about this test strips for patients with diabetes. But country, Ukrainian states, is in process of understanding what is going, and I hope totally that next year we will get all these services from all the branches of our society. Another one point I would like to tell you, it is about the consolidarity of society. Could you show the next slide, please? So the first days of the war, it was a good test for our humanity. And in times of war, we see the consolidation of society so much. Political forces have united to win the war. We saw the coordinated work of the parliaments, where all political players moved from criticism to mutual assistance. This discourse of support was reflected in electoral mood, and we saw that on all the level of authority, from the local to the national, from the one house to another house, from one organization to another generation, we saw this totally support to each one and totally help for everyone who are in this big tragedy. And this consolidation is not absolute, for sure, but compared to the pre-war period, it is absolutely worth it. And the change in the sociality of the economy during the war is noticeable. And the transition from the typically market exchange, when directing a certain good, we expect a certain good in return to the gift regime, we transfer the good without receiving mutual benefit. And this is characteristic not only for the state, it is characteristic for the, first of all, of various economical actors, economical and social actors, and people are getting close into each one. And here it is worth mentioning the phenomenon of volunteering as kind of resistant practice. It is an absolute phenomenon for Ukrainian society from the 2014 till now. And there are different aspects on volunteering. Donations, helps to relatives and friends, institutions volunteering, even support in small details for each other. Everyone did everything what he or she could. And it is result of this situation now that we are in the process of victory of our country. It was not possible without our consolidations. And now to be a Ukrainian means to be involved in the practice of resistance to help of our victory. And the participation of everyone in the victory will be the criterion for how the new stratification system will be formed, and the stages are addressed primarily to the army, to volunteers. Thus, two formulas of comprehension were born: common treat and common goods. Victory in the war becomes a nation-building idea. And this thesis, I will tell you now, is confirmed by the fact that 100% of Ukrainians think that Russia is enemy and is approve our cooperations and support for each one. According to the data of social group rating, the first thing that describes Ukrainian society today, it is a belief in victory. In March, the belief in victory was 93%, and the situation till now has not changed. Most likely, they will go to the end with this phase. Another figure, Ukrainians' assessments of the directions of the state, we can talk about. Could you show please the next slide? 75% of Ukrainians believe that we are moving to the right direction, and emotions change when Ukrainians assess their state. And more than 80% of Ukrainians people feel proud of the state right now. And notice please that last year, 20% felt ashamed of the country. Today, they are not such people. In 2020, the vast majority of people said that they felt disappointed in the attitudes towards the state. Now, 90% don't have something disappointed. If earlier 8 out of 10 people identified themselves as Ukrainians, now 10 out of 10 and twice as many feel Europeans and Ukrainians. Before the war, 7 to 9 identified themselves with Russians. Now only 5%. And people consider Russian toxic and don't want to identify themselves with them. Actually, the language issue, the number of people who speaks Russian at home has significantly decreased. People switched to two languages. 80,000 consider Ukrainian to be their native language. More than 80,000 say that Ukrainian should be the only state language. Identification of oneself in relation to Russia, and according to this, for all 100% of Ukrainians, Russia is enemy. And by the way, Belarus is also an enemy for almost of respondents. 56% of respondents believe that Russia invaded to completely destroy the Ukrainian people. And 39% believe that they came to our country to occupy and to accession the Russian Federation. Regarding the characteristic of the regime, 41% believe that Russia is a dictatorship state. 37% believe that they have fascism state, and 10% believe that they belong to Nazism regime. And continue to discuss this survey, 90% of Ukrainians stand for deprivations of mandates of pro-Russian parties. 86% for the ban of pro-Russian parties in Ukraine, and more than 80% recognize their own power as a heroic institutions. And also we can talk about the situations with St. Georgian ribbon. 73% decided that it should be banned for Ukrainian society. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has been going for 9 months. And we all understand that this winter will not be easy due to the destruction of the energy system across Ukraine by the Russians. And now Ukraine lacks from 30 to 50% of electricity, depending on the time of conception. Despite the fact that the air defense system are working quite effectively today, even then cannot give a 100% guarantee of security. And Ukrainian authorities are considering different scenarios. And the worst scenario is not excluded. And when there will be no electricity, heat, and water at all. And with the onset of winter and the drop in temperature, people living far from the front line and its immediately vicinity, who have been living in very difficult conditions for 9 months, will face deterioration living conditions. Thousands of people living in homes destroyed during the full-scale war will also have to deal with temperature dropping to minus 20 degrees in some parts of countries, and power and water and electricity cut will severely hamper the operations of hospitals and health centers, further limited people's access to medical care, and so on. However, dozens of Facebook and other social medias, it seems that people are very determined and they're not going to leave Ukraine. And businessmen are buying generators, Starlinks, someone is buying solar panels, and sometimes is going writing wells, and the shelling is going on, but the people don't give up. And what we see was the polls that the situation worsens, then indeed some residents are ready to consider the option of moving, living at least temporarily, either to safer regions of Ukraine or abroad. This is such a part of people. On the other hand, we see this, according to the polls, the vast majority of people, 80%, depending on the regions and on the situation, are not ready to leave their hometown. And returning to these surveys, in the frontline cities, in the consideration, for example, in Mykolaiv, people are ready to be there to fight for their city and don't give up till the end. And it is absolutely amazing thing about this. And could you show the next slide, please? Now everything what is going in Ukraine, it is war. And this is policy of terror against national resistance was what Putin with his society is trying to do, but it doesn't work anymore. And one of the goals of Russia attacks on civilian infrastructure is to force the Ukrainian authority to negotiate. The next slide, please. The lack of heat, electricity, and other benefits of civilization, according to the Russians, creates unbearable conditions for the civilian populations and undermines the ability and will of Ukrainians to resist. And this, in the end, will force the authority to negotiate on the terms of the invaders, according to their opinion. The use of terror strategy is perhaps the only thing that Russia can oppose when it is unable to achieve its goals by military ways. However, the Kremlin seriously miscalculated. What conclusion can be drawn at this stage during the almost blackout in whole the country, during the horrible attack in Donbass and other regions in the country? Today, we are determined Russians open genocide aggression at a high price, and Putin miscalculated his terror against the civilian people, against the Ukrainian people, strikes on social infrastructure have the opposite effect. Instead of readiness to surrender, people's irritation increases, and Ukrainians mobilize even more than they were before this terrible terror, even in the frontline eastern regions. People who doubted the gains of Maidan before the aggression are reasoning in the recent history of their country. Freedom and dignity are always on ambitions. And each of them, independently of each other, convinced that Ukraine will be different after the victory, and certainly more mature. It would be better to win. And you know that there are three top values for modern Ukrainians. It is a human life, 92% called it freedom and human rights, 89%, and mutual assistance, 87%. Could you show the next slide, please? All these three spiritual values shows the highest of spiritual mood of Ukrainian society. And you know that 88% of Ukrainians believe that in 10 years, Ukraine will be a prosperous country with the United Union and are ready to endure temporary financial difficulties for these. This is evidenced by the result of the survey conducted in the end of October in Kyiv by the International Institute of Sociology. Sociologists asked respondents to choose which of the two scenarios of Ukraine's future, optimistic or pessimistic, they agree with to great existence. And you know that 88% of Ukrainians believe that in 10 years, Ukraine will be a prosperous country with the United Union. And at the same time, 63% of them are fully share this view, and 26% rather agree. And only 5% of respondents have pessimistic expectations that in 10 years, Ukraine will be a devastated country with an outflow of people. The respondents who are optimistic about the future of Ukraine in 10 years were asked an additional questions whether they are ready to experience material difficulties for 3 or 5 years to achieve a positive result in the future. And you know, 96% of Ukrainians answered that they are ready to experience material difficulty for 3 or 5 years if a result of Ukraine becomes a prosperous country and members of the European Union. We are, as scientists, especially social scientists, we often have a lot of questions from foreign scientists and experts. What exactly helps Ukrainians to hold on the conditions of this terror by Russia and not to demand from their own governments to negotiate with Russia to stop their hostility. At the same time, it is often a genuine surprise of some Western observers about the resilience of Ukrainians in continuing armed resistance. And, you know, right now, Ukrainians have a very positive image of the future of Ukraine. And what is important is that this dream of the majority, a successful Ukraine in the family of European Union, and it's considered quite achievable and worth the tragic investment of today. And today's resilience on the front lines and in civilian line is transformed into reward for themselves and their descendants in the future. It helps to keep the lines and methodologically to move to the realizations of our dream. So I think that if I should do some summaries, I would say that we are still keeping different types of fronts, including scientific. And I hope that in the future we will discuss consequences of the war, living in peaceful country and with our happy children and healthy parents. Thank you so much. If you have some questions, I'm ready to answer.
Thank you, Julia, for rather interesting lecture description of Ukrainian society at wartime. And there are a couple of questions to you received through the social media accounts. The first question is, has the attitude of Ukrainian society to government institutions changed due to military aggression? What is your opinion?
Yes, it is absolutely, obviously. And we had from other previous lectures about these changes, but right now we can see that even if we have some difficulties during the war and during the other reasons of the situations in our political establishment, we also see that Ukrainian society supports all government institutions. And you know, Olena, as a sociologist, that the level of president support is increased highly, and we don't spoke about the army, but army had the very high support before that, but right now it is one institute is a leader of support of Ukrainian society. But also, just I told in my lecture and noticed that in spite of all difficulties, government and society is still stable in providing of all services what can keep our society and our people even in this terrible situation.
Thank you, Julia. And the next question. What are your focus as a sociologist regarding migration process through the war and after the war?
You know, be frankly, I'm not optimistic about the migration process because according to my professional agenda, right now I am facing with a lot of people who are abroad, and I understand that situations is rather difficult. Yes, I can talk that majority wants to go to come back home, but in the same time they are very afraid because there is no safe place, and they are not ready to come back right now. And we understand that if situation will be worse, and at least the war will last to the next year, to the end of next year, or even couple years. So I think that situation will migration will be not well for Ukraine, because if we are talking now that abroad. Now I'm talking only about the people who are abroad. If we are speaking about the women who are mostly here with their children, and most of them are teenagers, and if they finish school here, and in a couple of years he will have opportunity to enter to international university, for sure they will stay here. And unfortunately, we will lose a lot of young people who could be rebuild Ukraine. But in the same time, I could be optimistic because I'm sure the government could think up something for coming back these people, for creation some new conditions for coming back these people, for forming the new business, and for getting their good conditions for building new business, and to up economical system, and it could be good conditions for coming back of these people. But in the same time, I understand that situation will be worse inside of country, because we know that the situations in south and in the east of country, and we have a big risk about this migration process. So we will see what it will be, but right now I would say that situation is rather difficult in this.
Yes, I share the same opinion, especially observing the situation inside Germany, for example. A case.
Yeah, and do you know, just a moment, I see how, for example, in Germany, Ukrainian community are settled. You know that in Berlin there are a lot of Ukrainian schools appeared. It was not possible some years ago, but right now we see because people need to belong to the school, and not only in Berlin but in whole Germany. We see we know that Ukrainians are very self-organized, and they can organize everything everywhere, and they're able to do it. And as I told you, 70% of women who left Ukraine, they have higher education. So I'm sure that they will have opportunity to organize a lot of new institutions, Ukrainian schools, and don't to lose their identity. And in the same time, it's they will continue to live here, and to don't to lose national identifications. And for sure, it's a risk. It's a big risk.
Yeah, but they will become, so to say, the angel of Ukrainian breeding, Ukrainian promotion into German society also. And I think it's very positive sometimes. Okay, and the last question, how will Ukrainian society be affected by the terrible traumas that Ukrainians have experienced, are experiencing now, and will experience in the future? What can you say?
So, you know, I think that Ukrainian society got very hard psychological trauma and historical trauma, and without any doubts, it's a long process of recovering, psychological recovering and social recovering. And it's a really big question, because I think at least 2 or 3 generations should live with it, just to try to understand what was going and how to recreate all the system. So actually right now, this question is very new for Ukrainian society, but at the same time it is very difficult for discussion, and because we are getting a lot of people got the biggest trauma about this war. So I think that in the nearest future, Ukrainian society will face with it, and we should do a lot of things to work with it with a lot of people. I'm sure that psychologists will have a lot of job there, and doctors too.
For sure. Thank you very much, Julia, for
Thank you so much.
Very interesting description of Ukrainian society at war and your visions concerning the future. And this is the end of our lecture series concerning Kharkiv region. And thank you for everybody, for our sponsors as Konrad Adенауера Foundation, the first, and Science at Risk program, and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. See you.
Thank you so much.